Jason. I'm a retired police officer. I'm also a cybersecurity consultant. I've worked for many years for Alberta Justice, PPSC, the RCMP, and many others. Before I actually start, this week, my good friend Mr. Kenny and I had a little chat online. Sent him a lot of questions about what's going on with COVID, and out of 2,800 comments at 2 a.m. in the morning, he decided to answer the one where I criticised his interaction with the politicians in his party. That was the most important thing that Mr. Kenny needed to respond to at 2 o'clock in the morning. So Mr. Kenny, now as I've got your attention, how about answering some real questions?
No kidding.
And all the politicians who are cowering under the table, how about actually standing up and answering to the people who elected you? Jason Kenny did not elect you. The people did. It is time you stopped cowering under the tables and actually listen to the people and ask questions. I know you tried to ask those questions at the beginning and Kenny shut you down using the statement, we can't talk about that and go against Dina Hinshaw. It would be political suicide. Well, guess what's more important than political suicide? The people's lives that are being lost every single day. So, let's move on from Jason Kenny, because I think we've all had enough of him. Over the years, as a police officer and then as a retired police officer, I've worked with many different services, from the armed services to the police across the world, to Alberta Justice, to the federal PPSC. A number of years ago, I was invited to talk to a body called the Chiefs and Chiefs, which is the chief prosecutors for the whole of Canada and Alberta, and the chiefs of police for the same areas. I'd like to be invited again to actually ask you why you are allowing this to continue in the obvious space of criminal activity. I've called out my colleagues in the police, the armed services, the security services, the judicial system. And I'm going to ask you again, it is time to stand up. I don't know what you're waiting for. I hear over and over again that you're just waiting for the right time and you will be here when you're needed. Well, you were needed in March. You were needed now. So it is time to stand up and stop listening to your supervisors, to start asking questions. You know better. But the reality is, it's going to take a while for those people to stand up. Primarily for one reason, because the politicians are ignoring everyone. The senior police officers are ignoring everyone. Senior doctors are ignoring everyone to the detriment of everybody. In fact, just before we arrived here today, I've written a piece called Winter is Coming, where I warn that in flu season there is nothing other than COVID now. And as we were coming up, I received a text from a good friend who had just been diagnosed over a video conference with shingles. Because the shingles rash is near her eyes, potentially it's life-threatening and will certainly potentially lead to blindness. The doctor didn't do anything but talk to her over a video conference, because God forbid doctors actually interact with people anymore. So she called the Medi Centre to say, I need to come in and see someone. And their response, despite having been diagnosed with shingles, was you can't come in, it might be a COVID rash. So now she's forced to isolate at home, where potentially this could turn into something far more serious and life-threatening. Well, this is going to happen with everything right now. Anything you phone the doctor about, anything you phone the hospital about, apparently is COVID. In the Southern Hemisphere this year, which is the precursor flu season to our flu season, they had a reduction in flu cases of 99%. Now, if anybody believes that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Obviously, flu season in the southern hemisphere didn't change. It's the same as it has been every other year. The difference is that we had the exact same number of COVID cases as we normally have flu cases. So what has really happened? I think we all know. So what do we do next? How do we actually make this stop? Well, in a democracy, there is one last option. The last option are the courts. And our Madam Chief Justice Fraser is responsible for Alberta and some other areas of this country. So I'm going to speak to you, Madam Chief Justice, and I'm going to speak to all your colleagues, all the judges, all the lords, all the justices around the world, from the Supreme Court here in Canada, in Alberta, in the US, to the House of Lords in the UK. Every single one of you, you are the last step in democracy. You are the ones that hold the government accountable. You do not have to wait for somebody to come and say so. Right now, we have police officers and doctors who won't stand up for fear of what will happen. We have armed forces who won't stand up because they fear it is not the right time. Well, Madam Justice, in your speech, your acceptance speech, you stated that all judges must be vigilant and they must, above all else, be fearless. So, Madam Justice, it is time for you to be fearless. It is time for you to actually look at the evidence and not wait for somebody who has no idea what they're doing to come and file an action against the courts. You have a duty to defend democracy. You have a duty to save lives. And right now, the courts are sorely absent. You closed the courts down at a time when you were needed the most, and you did it on the most flimsy of evidence. If I've stood in front of many different judicial processes and argued to judges. If I gave the arguments that this government and Dina Hinshaw has given to justify what has happened, you would laugh me out of court. Nay, you would hold me in contempt and drag me down into the cells, and I would deserve it. So, Madam Justice, justices around the world, I suggest you start talking to each other and actually be the defenders of democracy that you are designed to be. Because once you make a stand and you show the rest of the world that this will not stand, that democracy means something, that people's lives mean something, then the police will stand with you, the armed forces will stand with you, and these tyrants who have no argument and no business ruling us will be dealt with properly and legally.
Right on, Dave.
Just one last thing on rising case numbers and COVID and everything. Everybody's going to start getting afraid soon because these numbers are going to start growing. Our cases, as of right now, in our wonderful province where Kenny says we're doing so well, are the third highest in Canada. Only Quebec and Ontario really ahead of us. We've got 51 cases per 100,000 as of right now, and we know all those cases are a joke. Our flu season has an average of 179 to 215. If we counted flu cases as we count COVID, then you will be looking later this year at seeing numbers in the thousands per 100,000. A little fact that if you go on the CDC's website, it will give you some information about how many people actually catch flu a year, or what we call cases now of an infection. On average, that is 1 billion people a year. That's billion, not million, not 100 million, 1,000 million people. What are you going to do when they announce on the TV with the big red flashing circles that 1 billion people have caught COVID. Because there is nothing else until somebody stops and says, you know what, there is COVID and we can test for it, but it's not a PCR test, it's not a single serology test. It requires x-rays, it requires more. But we should actually be looking for other things, like shingles, like pneumonia, like a common cold, like an allergy to having switched on the furnace. We have to look at other things. I'm listening to business after business being shut down because currently they're running out of staff because the staff are having to be isolated. Literally because they have the sniffles. Everybody knows they don't have COVID. But what people don't realize is you can test negative for COVID. But if you are symptomatic, you have to stay home. In schools, it's the exact opposite though. If your child is in contact with somebody who tests positive, then they have to isolate and the family has to isolate. If they test positive, the family has to isolate. But if they have symptoms, as Dina Hinshaw announced on Thursday, then the family doesn't have to isolate. So hang on. If you actually look like you've got COVID, then you don't have to isolate the family. But if you have no symptoms whatsoever and somebody's been tested with a known faulty test which Alberta Health themselves say cannot be used to infer an infection, then everybody isolates. Dina, you're going to have to draw me a diagram because I don't understand it. And I'm a relatively smart guy in this area. So anyway, you're going to see some scary numbers carrying on now. But when you're told you've got something, push back. Tell your doctor, no, there's more than COVID out there. This time of year I get a cold. This time of year I normally get strep throat. For me, this time of year I get chest infections. It's due to lung damage from a ventilator. I would not accept a COVID diagnosis over the phone from somebody answering 811. You shouldn't either. If your children look like they're sick, then treat them as you would have done pre-COVID. Find out what they've really got. If they are sick, keep them home. But if they're not sick, don't accept somebody saying because they took a test or somebody else took a test that they have COVID. There is more to life than COVID. And there always was and there always will be. But if we only accept COVID, then we are finished. And we have to stop this. So again, Madam Justice, I hope you've watched all of the speeches today and any more that come. And I suggest you actually look at all the others. I suggest you actually get out of your chair, get out of your office, stop looking at the dusty books on the wall and actually do some research and look at what democracy is being destroyed around you. Do your job. Police officers, do your job. Armed forces, do your job. I swore an oath, and that's why I'm here. And I will be here until my dying day, or until this stops.
Right on, buddy.